She thought she was in bed with her boyfriend, until she saw his face. "I felt violated," I said. "This feels unnatural. But I don't know whether it's criminal. This woman's situation has made rape laws vulnerable." Abigail Finney was sound sleeping in her boyfriend's bed in West Lafayette, Indiana, when she felt him. They had only been dating formally for a few weeks. It was one of those college relationships when a buddy gradually starts to mean more to you via inside jokes and secret moments. He was the humorous one, loud to her, quiet, outgoing, and somehow friends with everyone. She continued, gazing out from behind a large pair of round spectacles with big brown eyes. "He'll walk out of class the first day, and he'll already have pals. I'm not that talented." They shared a dorm room at the First Street Towers on the Indiana's Purdue University campus in West Lafayette, a refuge for engineering and science among a sea of farmland, where a bronze monument of a dapper Neil Armstrong, a Purdue grad, is prominently displayed. The fortunate children lived on First Street. In contrast to the impromptu, office-like basements some Purdue students have been forced to sleep in, the towers are roomy and contemporary. There are single rooms and private bathrooms in the towers. As long as you don't create a lot of noise, you can even invite guests. To get a position for the 19-year-old first-year student, Abigail's grandmother, who was married to a Purdue professor, had to use her connections. As a female, you just sort of chuckle about it because you can't fight everything. Abigail, who has long, straight brown hair, a fair complexion, and a 90s hipster flair, stated, "It was just one of those evenings." She was invited to hang out in his room by her boyfriend, a freshman as well. On his futon, he had some friends over and they were playing video games. She hid in the twin loft bed up above. Despite being forbidden, some were nonetheless drinking. Abigail continued to remain sober while browsing the internet on her laptop. Every now and again, her partner would climb the ladder to cuddle with her and check on her. On February 11, 2017, they would mark their first Valentine's Day together in a few days. She said that at one point Grant, one of his pals, made a degrading remark about wanting Abigail to have excellent sex with her boyfriend. She pretended to be amused, since she assumed he was being foolish and intoxicated. After all, they were a young couple. His pals would react strangely to it. As a female, you just sort of chuckle about it because you can't fight everything, she added. Lateness set in. The evening came to an end. While her lover slept next to her, Abigail dozed off. On the futon, his three friends passed out. Abigail is the kind of person who sleeps so much that she often forgets to set an alarm or carry on lengthy talks with others. He was touching her breast over her t-shirt as he approached from behind her, which at least partly roused her. She consented to his touch. They stayed silent. His pals were sound sleeping. She felt his hand begin to touch her clitoris while still wearing pajamas. She complied with it. She seized his penis and put it into her vagina while still turning away. They engaged in sexual activity. It was just short, about a minute long. When she informed him that she needed to visit the restroom, she broke off. She finished up and ascended the staircase to her bed. Only then did she realize who was inside. Her guy wasn't the one. Grant was there. "I can still see him smiling at me." She described the picture as weird. "I was just a little frantic. I had no idea what was happening." She figured the boys were pulling a joke on her. Where was her guy? She inquired. His other companions said they didn't know when they awoke. She ran to her dorm room when she realized her keys were gone, and saw her boyfriend sound sleeping in her bed. "I felt violated," I said. "This feels unnatural. But I'm not sure whether it's against the law." "What time did you enter my room?" she pleaded fervently. He said that he had withdrawn there hours earlier, since he was unable to fall asleep with her occupying his little twin bed. She described Grant's actions. After hearing what Abigail had just told him about his friend's actions, her boyfriend rushed out, furious and perplexed. Abigail worked over what had just transpired, as she was alone herself in her room. Having been raped, was this a criminal offense? She requested advice from her two pals through SMS. I felt violated, I said. This feels unnatural, but I'm not sure whether it's against the law. Abigail had good reason to be perplexed. Despite the fact that Grant subsequently said he knew Abigail wasn't consenting to sex with him, what he did was legally allowed under the laws of her state. That's because rape in Indiana only occurs when sex is forced or threatened, when the victim is mentally incapable of giving informed permission, or when the victim is not aware that sex is taking place. Abigail was aware that she was having sex. She just wasn't aware that Grant was involved. However, Abigail's case has revealed a gap in the laws of not just Indiana, but more than 3/4 of U.S. states and territories. The word consent, when it does appear in a statute, is not expressly defined in laws. Ask most people what the definition of rape is, and you're likely to hear a variation on the phrase non-consensual sex. Thus, it is often not against the law to compel sex using fraud, deceit, or impersonation in this environment. Only a few U.S. states, including California, Idaho, Missouri, Tennessee, and Puerto Rico, have rape by deception legislation in place. It's a misdemeanor in Alabama. Only in Colorado is it a crime if the perpetrator poses as the victim's spouse. Due of this, rules against sexual assault stand out among other laws. A state lawmaker from Indiana, Julie Olthoff, likened the predicament to someone acting as a buyer to persuade a vehicle owner to give them the keys, but never returning the car to the lot. She said that would be charged as stealing. The right to one's own body is thus superior than the right to another object of property, correct? Following Abigail's case, sexual assault campaigners and U.S. legislators have pushed for the criminalization of rape by deception and a clearer definition of what constitutes consent. But these rules will also compel us to consider the nature of sex, which may profoundly alter how we see it. Are you committing to sleeping with simply the physical being in front of you when you have sex? Or is it something more significant and intricate? Many people would believe that a guy who tricks his sister-in-law into having sex with him by claiming to be his twin brother ought to be put on trial. What about a guy who connives a lady by posing as a different, false version of himself who is more prosperous or even single? What about the hordes of falsehoods that are concealed in so many online dating accounts where individuals provide fake information about themselves? According to Sally Segrist, the Indiana Assemblywoman who led the effort to change her state's law in the wake of Abigail's case, I'm not sure we could effectively legislate all of the cases where somebody lies. Because then you get to the point where, okay, the guy said he was on the football team and he's not. Still, it's not right. Although it is a violation, I'm not sure whether it qualifies as rape. For hundreds of years, the law has battled with situations involving rape by deception. The oldest known instance of this happened in Lancaster, England, in 1822, when a man by the name of Joseph Jackson entered a woman's bed, as if he had been her husband, and engaged in sexual activity with her. More incidents, like the one in which an Irish lady called Judith Gorman slept off while her husband was out fishing in 1884, were recorded. When Michael D. entered her pitch-black room and plopped down on top of her, she awakened. Gorman, who assumed Gorman was Dee's spouse, said to her, "You came in quite quickly." She reached up to stroke his hair and discovered with horror that the guy was a stranger only after they started having intercourse, which was defined as his having connection with her in 19th-century British courts. The judges at the trial determined that based on what Dee had said when Gorman entered the room, she must have known Gorman believed he was her husband. This awareness made the act of rape acceptable. She reached out to touch his hair, and to her astonishment discovered he was a stranger. These incidents don't only happen in the past. A Massachusetts lady who was sleeping in her boyfriend's bed in 2005 awakened to the sound of a guy entering the space. She didn't realize it was her boyfriend's brother until he opened the door to depart after their sexual encounter. However, the state's highest court ruled that the conduct was permissible because, as in Indiana, rape was seen as forced sexual activity done against the will of the victim. Such situations may result in quite different results in places where rape by deception is specifically prohibited. In one of them, Tennessee, a guy who had called ladies purporting to be their loves and persuaded them to take off their clothes, put on blindfolds, and wait for him to arrive, was convicted guilty of rape in 1996. One lady asked him as they started having sex, "Tell me something that only you and I know," but she received no response. She was horrified to discover the guy wasn't who she thought he was, and she lay immobilized in fear. He is now residing in Nashville, after being given a 15-year jail term. In a different case, a Canadian court affirmed the conviction of a guy who had intercourse with a lady who believed he was his twin and was convicted of sexual assault in 2008. Even when she yelled his brother's name, he remained silent. After having sex with his friend's mother, a guy in South Australia was charged with a crime a year later. The mother, like Abigail, had been sound asleep when she felt the touch of a guy she thought to be her boyfriend. She was barely awake, like Abigail, when she slipped the man's penis into her vagina. The guy was found guilty of rape, in contrast to Abigail's case. Lies may breach these rights just as much as physical violence or threats can. This helps explain why for centuries marital rape wasn't a crime. Under the same logic, unmarried women who were tricked into sex were not victims under the law, because they had consented to being defiled. Rape laws historically have their roots in the sexist desire to protect women's virtue and chastity from being defiled. Justice Anthony Kennedy wrote in the 2003 Supreme Court case that struck down sodomy laws as unconstitutional, "Liberty presumes an autonomy of self that includes certain intimate conduct." But in recent decades, the law has shifted its focus to what Yale Law School professor Jed Rubenfeld calls the concept of sexual autonomy, the right to decide with whom and under what circumstances a person has sex. This idea of sexual liberty goes much farther in Rubenfeld's eyes. In a 2013 paper, he argued that, assuming that sexual autonomy means anything, it surely includes the right not to have sex with a married man if you don't want to. These rights can be violated by lies, just as much as they can be by force or threat. Joyce Short is familiar with what it takes to reconstruct one's life, after experiencing a number of tragedies, as she sits in her real estate office while staring out at a sea of Manhattan skyscrapers. In her early 20s, she was swept off her feet by a charming foreign-born man who claimed to be single, Jewish, several years older than her, a successful NYU graduate, and even a Vietnam War veteran. In reality, he was none of these things. She had been molested as a child. She had been sexually assaulted in college. After she became pregnant but was convinced by him to have an abortion, Short, now 70, only learned the truth months into the relationship. After helping her return home from the hospital, he revealed he wasn't single after all. He was still married to the woman he'd falsely claimed was his ex. Short then went to her medicine cabinet, grabbed a bottle of sleeping pills, and ingested every tablet. "The only reason that I'm here doing this," Short told BuzzFeed News. "He assaulted me is something that I face every day of my life," Short said. "Even when I relax by watching television, I can't escape." Short is adamant that what her former partner did to her was as bad as the earlier sexual assaults she had endured, perhaps worse, because she became emotionally and psychologically trapped in the relationship. In a self-published autobiography, Short said that the man had violated me with his perversion regularly for over 3 years to steal sex, compassion, and care. He had done both emotional rape and rape by deception. Short, who runs a blog, emails lawmakers and prosecutors, and shares her story with journalists and the public, has emerged as one of the nation's leading opponents of rape by fraud in recent years. When Short saw #MeToo founder Tarana Burke speak in Manhattan in October, she took advantage of the Q&A session to urge Burke to join her own movement. Short wants consent defined in every state as freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement, something she believes to be true. Prosecutors ignore her. Not everyone is interested, and she receives skeptical or even nasty comments on her blog. People do not want to open Pandora's door. They do not want to handle the notion of consent, she said. Short received a new email for the Google News alert she had set for rape by fraud cases in the first few days of February of this year, and when she clicked on the link, the news about a recent jury judgment from Indiana made her fury boil. Abigail searched on Google to discover if any other ladies had ever had the same experience as she had with Grant while she sat in her dorm room trying to get over her shock. "It's not that simple in real life because things are less clear-cut," she said. "I don't know whether I speak for all women, but I absolutely, before this occurred, had always thought about what I would do, and it was always just, oh, I would just report it." Snap judgment. RAIN, the Rape, Abuse and Incest National Network, encouraged her to go to the hospital and offered to send over an advocate to help her once she had discovered their hotline number. Had she dreamed the whole intercourse because her thoughts had been cloudy and she had been half asleep? She started to question herself since the sex had occurred when her mind was cloudy and she was only partially awake. After speaking to Grant, who said he knew Abigail believed she was having sex with her boyfriend, who refused to be interviewed, and the two requested that his name not be used in this story, arrived. Then she said, "I was fairly convinced that had occurred, but I suppose you sort of question yourself when something this out of the ordinary. I don't know how to express it. That was like something you wouldn't anticipate occurring." Together, they traveled to the hospital, where highly trained nurses collected swabs for a rape kit, placed her garments on waxed paper to gather any stray evidence, and gave her STD prevention medication. "They did some really CSI stuff I didn't think they would do," Abigail recalled of the detective's interrogation of her and her boyfriend at the police station that evening. "They had him call Grant, and they recorded the phone call, and they used that as their probable cause to arrest him." According to a police affidavit, Donald Grant Ward, 19, who is known to his friends as Grant, admitted to police that what Abigail had described was true after he was taken into custody at 11:33 p.m. that same Sunday. He admitted waiting until Abigail's boyfriend had left the room before climbing into the bunk bed. He admitted she had her back to him in the dark room when he started touching her. The declaration of probable cause from the authorities, which omitted Abigail's name, said that Ward revealed he had sexual intercourse with victim number 1, knowing she thought him to be her boyfriend. Prosecutors in Tippecanoe County then made a crucial choice, choosing to accuse Ward with 2 counts of rape. In retrospect, Abigail acknowledged that she should have questioned them once they had given her the exact allegations. In only a few hours, the jury rendered their decision. Grant's defense counsel, Kirk Freeman, argued throughout the 3-day trial that although his actions were ungentlemanly, they weren't against the law in Indiana. The jury agreed. "There are many things in this world that we wouldn't do ourselves, but that doesn't constitute them crimes," according to Freeman, who told BuzzFeed News. "Something may be nasty, something can be against cultural standards, against manners." Freeman insisted that Grant did not do any physical act, or, in legalese, no actus reus, that could be construed as a fraud while sitting in his office just outside the neo-Gothic courtroom in the heart of Lafayette on a beautiful October day. "There are many things in this world that we ourselves wouldn't do, but that doesn't make them illegal." He didn't say anything. He remained silent. He took no action. He had no mask on, according to Freeman. Grant refused to take part in an interview for this article. The defense lawyer claimed that the prosecution overcharged the case, and that they ought to have pursued a case of sexual battery instead. He imitated a toddler whimpering, saying, "It makes absolutely no sense if you're boo-hoo-hoo the victim, boo-hoo-hoo. Why not pursue legal action for what you could do, rather than what you knew was clearly against the law, if your concern was for her?" The sexual battery statute in Indiana was changed in 2012 to include situations like Abigail's, in which someone touches for sex pleasure another person's genitalia, pubic region, buttocks, or female breast, while that person is ignorant of the contact. The prosecution, according to Freeman, had a legislation that would have protected Abigail, but they refused to enforce it. But the act of groping Abigail while she was sleeping would only have been covered by the sexual battery legislation, not the later act of groping her after she awoke. Additionally, a 2.5-year jail term was the maximum penalty. Grant could have spent 3 to 16 years in prison if found guilty of rape. Tippecanoe County Prosecutor Patrick Harrington rebuffed several requests for an interview for this article. He specifically refused to make any information on the case public, citing Grant's records being expunged after his acquittal. Abigail was confident the jury would be found guilty when the foreperson read the verdict on February 6th of this year. She had listened to the final arguments and found the prosecution's case to be strong. She doesn't recall whether anybody in the jury gave her a glance as the first verdict of not guilty was read. She said, "After they read the first one, I sort of knew he would escape. I was rather enraged. Since I might have been attempting to heal, but instead kept reopening the wound, I felt as if I had wasted a year of my life." The trial was even referred to as a second trauma by my therapist, so I think I felt like I had done all that for nothing. Tippecanoe County's Republican state legislator, Sally Segrist, was determined to ensure that Abigail's suffering wasn't in vain. "I never want another rape victim to see their attacker go free due to a flaw in our state law. That's not acceptable," she said in an interview with BuzzFeed News, held in front of the Indianapolis Capitol's stained glass rotunda window. "We draft laws to safeguard our folks. Abby was not given any protection under our laws." Abigail's tale brought up for Segrist memories of her time at Indiana University in the early 1970s. A student entered a sleeping woman's bed one night, thinking he was her lover. The tragedy prompted several safety lectures and modifications to the dorm bylaws. Segrist recollects feeling outraged and appalled at the young woman's trust being betrayed. She is unable to recall if she saw it as a sexual assault at the time, since the 1970s were a different time period. "I never want another rape victim to have their rapist go free due of a flaw in our state law," she said. But she is sure that rape is what happened to Abigail. She is also furious that Grant got away with it. "That we could have a confessed rapist and not be able to prosecute," she continued, "was simply repugnant to me." The case was brought to trial by Segrist's close friend Harrington, and Segrist defended his choice to charge Grant with rape rather than sexual battery in light of his confession and the DNA evidence. Even still, Harrington's inability to get a conviction sparked a fire inside her, which may not have occurred if he had opted to pursue the lesser charges. "Even if our rape legislation would have made me uncomfortable," she said, "I probably wouldn't have been as motivated." So Segrist enlisted Julie Olthoff, a Republican who served as the representative for Indiana's District 19 near Chicago, one of her favorite co-workers. Segrist described her as a petite, bouncy, fixed-smile individual. When it comes to women's and children's concerns, she is a tiny bulldog. She is a fighter. The matter was unknown to Olthoff until Segrist informed her of Grant's acquittal. "That's wrong. It's improper. How is it possible?" Olthoff recounted her first thoughts. "There's something wrong with the system. She is only dozing off in her boyfriend's bed. You don't believe there is any danger there to you. So that's when things start to seem a little terrifying, when you assume your safety. You're not safe, however. You don't believe that danger might befall you there while she's just sleeping in her boyfriend's bed, do you?" They wanted to change the state's penal code and define rape more broadly. They had meetings with the Indiana Coalition to End Sexual Assault, ICESA, the Prosecutors Association, public defenders, the state attorney general's office, police, and sheriffs. Even the traditional Republican guys, struggling with the new social norms of the #MeToo age, were solicited for assistance by Segrist as he started to reach out to his coworkers. Segrist also made contact with Joyce Short, a lady who lived in New York City hundreds of miles away, in her quest to learn all she could about rape by deception. Hearing how Short had been duped appalled Segrist. She felt for her deeply. Even so, when asked to define rape, Segrist said, "non-consensual sex," and when asked to define consent, she gave a definition that sounded almost exactly like the one Short is advocating: freely informed and fully informed agreement. However, when asked if she thought what happened to Short was rape, Segrist paused. She said, "I'm not certain." She is hesitant to include a concept of consent in the criminal code, and thinks that civil law would provide Short and other women with a stronger legal recourse. Olthoff, Segrist's co-worker, offers an entirely different perspective, demonstrating the complexity of the situation. "You may be prosecuted if you lie to get a possession, she stated. Therefore, lying to someone in order to have sex with them should also be illegal. To understand what non-consensual sex implies, we need a basic concept of permission. Short told BuzzFeed News in her New York office that politicians like Segrist should essentially go big or go home. Legislators, she added, cherry-pick very specific incidents and say, okay, my constituents believe it was a horrific case, and I want to make sure my people think I'm going to protect them from that particular form of sexual assault. But we need to take more action than that. To understand what non-consensual sex entails, Short argued that we require a basic understanding of permission. After Grant's acquittal, Freeman compared Abigail's situation to women who have affairs with guys who pose as pro football players, and questioned with skepticism if such a legislative effort would criminalize hitting on girls. That is very different from someone getting into a woman's bed, and she thinking that because she's secure in her bed that it is her partner, Segrist added, dismissing his comparison as the boasting of a lawyer who had just gotten a confessed rapist off. You're not even comparing apples and oranges, she said. You mentioned sweet potatoes and bison. However, it was justifications like Freeman's that prevented New Jersey from making rape by deception a crime in 2014. After one of his constituents, Michelle Lewis, was duped and even pregnant by a guy she met online, who claimed to be a British spy, Troy Singleton, now a state senator in New Jersey, filed the measure. However, Singleton claimed to BuzzFeed News that his measure was defeated in committee due to people's unwillingness to recognize that Lewis had been the victim of sexual assault, since there had been no physical violence, and local newspaper claims that the courts would be overrun with liars. Joyce Short is familiar with these justifications. She scoffs at the idea that criminal charges would be brought against males who tell women they love them in order to lure them into bed. She contends that there are requirements for admissible evidence, as well as prosecution latitude, to pursue just the most serious examples of fraud. Because nobody wants to go to prison to get laid, Short is certain that new rules would have a deterrent impact and put a stop to the lie. It simply makes sense. She said, when you alter the laws, you change morals. In part because of her fight for sexual assault, Short was recognized as a woman of distinction last year by Democratic Assemblywoman Rebecca Seawright of New York State. In her own campaign to get rape by deception made a crime in the state, Seawright told BuzzFeed News that she is just getting started. She and Segrist were scheduled to speak on favor of each other's proposals, demonstrating to the nation that this issue transcended parties as a rural Republican and a Manhattan Democrat. However, Short's revolution could still be a ways off. Last month, the Indiana campaign came to an end. In the midterm elections, Democrats defeated both Segrist and Olthoff, as large numbers of suburban women and young college students turned out to vote in protest of conservative ideology. The proposal will be taken up by another Republican from Indiana during the next session, but for the time being, Short is the only one left attempting to make a difference. When a reporter from the Kansas City Star phoned 2 years ago, Short was seated at that kitchen counter. In order to get scores of women to have sex with him, on the false pretext that they were auditioning for porn movies, a guy by the name of Mario Ambrose Antoine pretended to be a porn producer. A search for rape by deceit on Google brought Antoine, who was found guilty of federal wire fraud charges, to Short's website, according to evidence. The reporter wanted to know if Short was aware that she had played a small part in helping catch a predator. The prosecution described the website in their indictment as a website hosted by a sexual assault survivor, which seeks to educate women on how to avoid sex assault scams such as this one perpetrated by Antoine. She cried, her voice breaking as she continued. The tears began flowing down my cheeks. I was simply so happy to hear that what I had done had been significant and had made a difference, the author said. Despite her best efforts, Abigail was unable to escape thoughts of what had occurred to her. Grant was expelled from the university, but at the time of his arrest, his picture appeared on the front of the student newspaper. Students discussed the topic in huge group conversations without understanding the lady at its heart was a group member. She had to miss a semester of school in order to obtain therapy for severe depression and stress. Abigail was obliged to gaze at Grant throughout the 3-day trial in order to recognize him as her assailant. For over a year, she hadn't looked at him or seen his smile since she had begun to go back into bed that morning. She said, "I was just extremely afraid and wanted to get it over with." When he committed this crime, he had long hair. However, when he appeared in court, he had cropped it. As a result, I wondered whether I would now have to fear 2 different types of guys. Leslie Finney, her mother, said Abigail underwent a transformation from the joyful valedictorian who had left their home for college. She was quite anxious. She would wake up screaming from nightmares, according to Leslie. She just got depressed and reclusive. She stopped smiling, laughing, and other such behaviors. The decision made matters worse. After winning the case in court, the defense lawyer Freeman criticized Abigail's experience online by calling it regret sex by a Becky or basic white girl. After a year, Grant's college ban was lifted, but Abigail and her friends had stopped talking to him. She doesn't know where he transferred to in Indiana, but she heard he did. "He is now someone else's issue," she said. "Kicking the can down the road is all it is." She joined the University Democratic Socialists of America Club and is very political, yet she had to totally tune out during the Brett Kavanaugh proceedings. She made an effort to avoid reading the constant news coverage and avoiding talking about it with friends. There were several similarities between what people would say on the news and how people responded to her situation, she said. Like, why would you wreck his whole life over a single mistake that was remarked about mine? But the treatment did, if slowly, work. Leslie said that she's only now coming back to her old self. Now that she is back in school, Abigail is living in an off-campus studio apartment. In order to graduate with her pals, she has to make up the course credits she missed. Ellie, her emotional support cat, was given to her in honor of Laura Dern's Jurassic Park role. Abigail has a little stegosaurus necklace around her neck when we first meet. She adores that particular dinosaur. She adores the spine's distinctive plates, which it utilized to ward off predators. She has persevered with her partner as well. He had to decide whether to wait through this particularly awful phase or not. And that's a pretty important choice, particularly at the start of a relationship, she said. The rage endures. She is upset with Grant, of course, but she is also unhappy that she lives in a place where rape by deception is not a crime. She wants to leave Indiana when she graduates and relocate someplace warmer with maybe different laws. She said that nothing in this condition was really incorrect. I simply don't know, I guess. I can't use it.